is Michael Miller. That tall, good-looking man. Michael Miller writes about cannabis for the LA Weekly. He is a journalist, but he's also a lawyer and an investor. He runs a fund, so your worthy cannabis ventures should be brought to his attention. And Michael has two guests. His second guest is Jim Belushi. You know the man. His first guest is somebody impressive in every way. Marvin Washington. Marvin Washington, who played for the Jets, the Broncos, the Niners, 11 seasons as a defensive end. And I turn it over now to Michael Miller. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Victor Harwood, thank you for another great Digital Hollywood. I'm dead.
1, 2.
1, 2. Okay, here we go. All right. We'll have a really fun, compelling lunch session today. We have two extraordinary speakers from different walks of life. One, legendary NFL ball player, Marvin Washington. But today the focus will not be on the NFL days, although we'll have a brief introduction. The story will be on what Marvin is doing now and how is he shaping the future of new medical cannabis. Marvin, it's great to see you today. Thanks so much for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right, let's go in a little bit early days of Marvin Washington. You played 11 years in the league.
Correct.
And I imagine you had a couple bumps, a couple injuries during your way.
A few. Everybody talks about surgery, but minor surgery is something that happens to somebody else. I've had 7 major surgeries and probably 3 scopes, so I'm well averse to surgery and pain management and all that other stuff that goes with the NFL.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about the NFL. As you know, along with the NHL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball, because cannabis is federally illegal under the Controlled Substances Act, they are not allowed to even suggest that cannabis is used. In most of my discussions with commissioners, league owners, and players, there's a wink-wink. We know that they do it, but we can't do anything about it. But on the other side, I'm comfortable saying that the leagues are one of the biggest legal pushers of opiates, not only in America, but in the world today. Give me some of your thoughts about the use of opiates in the big leagues and keeping players that are injured on the field so they can continue to play and bring money into the sports.
Well, the whole thing about the NFL is ability, and so the biggest ability that you're going to have is availability. So you have to be available to practice and to play. You can play hurt, but you can't play injured. And so by the week 16, week 17, or later on in the season, everybody's playing hurt. And you can have guys in walking boots and soft casts all through the week, but they're playing on Sunday. And so with the NFL, with their opiates, as you said, they give them out. And I really don't blame the trainers, team trainers, and the doctors, because they're not educated, because they've been told and lied to by these pharmaceutical companies. But the NFL that I played in, the pharmaceutical routine started in January and started in July and ended in January, February, and it's still going on. And if I have, a broke finger, or I break my leg, of course I'm going to want some opiates, but not for a month, not for 6 weeks. And so what I want, particularly with the NFL, is to have an alternative to opiates and the benzodiazepines that they give these guys just to get them to play and to practice. And I think that's happening. The NFL is the biggest sports league in the world, but they're probably the furthest behind. You look at the NHL's policy, where cannabis is not there, they don't test for it, they don't suspend for it. Look at the NBA, cannabis is not on one of their drugs of abuse. And Major League Baseball is the same way. The NFL is the only one that is still finding these guys, suspending these guys, humiliating these guys, degrading these guys with these fines and suspension for cannabis, which is going to be a moot point anyway. because in 2020 they're renegotiating their CBA between the NFL and NBA. I think they're going to have a sensible cannabis program then.
But, since it's a states' rights issue, if you have an NFL team, for example, in Texas, the Dallas Cowboys, no matter what the union agreement says, if it's illegal under the state, one of those ball players for the Dallas Cowboys, if they're injured, they're going to have to remain taking opiates instead of cannabis.
Well, we would like to get them, maybe a broad spectrum or full spectrum CBD that's less than that state of Texas regulates right now. I think it's 0.05, or they can take a CBD isolate and have other ingredients in there that do the same thing. But the one thing that the NFL can do is they have something called a TUE. It's called a therapeutic use exemption, that they let these guys take Adderall and Ritalin with that have ADD and ADHD. I would like to see that in the legal states for cannabis, and that will cover probably a third of their leagues. But I don't think it's going to happen. But like I said, in 2020, something is going to be done because it has to. This is the way that not only sports leagues, but society is going to medicate themselves in the 21st century with cannabinoids, because we've gone down that opiate trail for the last 80 years, and it's wreaking havoc on America. And it doesn't matter whether you're urban or rural or whatever, it's hitting all facets of our society.
Absolutely. Well, that would be a great direction if that actually happens. So everybody in this industry, which I find most fascinating, is in it because of a personal story. They helped a child, they helped a parent. What's your personal cannabis story?
My personal cannabis story is coming out of the NFL dark ages and not knowing about it, and then in 2006, Mike Webster passing away, and Benjamin Amalu came out with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which nobody had heard about, at least the players. I believe the owners knew about this probably 40 years ago, but that repeated hits to the head and head trauma can cause some brain malfunctions. But between 2005 and 2012, we lost 22 guys to suicide, including some of the names that you can't tell the story of the NFL without, like Dave Durson and Mike Webster and Junior Seau. So I got involved with a group of players, and we're trying to find something for it, and everybody's coming out with, different shoes, knee braces, mouthpiece, helmets, but that's not going to stop a concussion. That's not going to mitigate the symptoms of a concussion. Then I heard about the government had that patent 6630507, that says CBD acts as an antioxidant and neuroprotectant for the brain in relationship to concussions, and so I did a deep dive into it. And that's what I was pushing. But being in this industry as an African American, it's taken me so many places. So I'm all in. It's personal with me as an athlete. It's personal with me as an African American in this industry and in this country. And it's personal with me as a businessman, because I want to see this movement, and I don't call it an industry. I just say we're a movement with an economy behind us. I want to see us grow and do it the right way. And we don't have to hype it up and say it's doing all these this, that, and the other. Just follow the science, tell the truth, have good business practice, because we already have an eye on us, the whole country, and let's do right and bring this thing into the 21st century.
Yes. So 2017 was a big year. In my hand is an 89-page legal complaint. And while I normally would never suggest reading an 89-page legal complaint, even as an attorney, this is an extraordinary document, because it tells the story, a series of stories, not just the story of the history of cannabis, but the history of a number of individuals who were harmed. And you, along with 4 other plaintiffs, filed a lawsuit against some fairly prominent people. Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions, the former Attorney General of America, the DEA of the United States of America and its director, the United States of America itself. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of this complaint so you don't have to read all 89 pages. And you will find it very compelling, and if it doesn't bring tears to your eyes, as a child, or as a parent, or as a grandson or daughter, I would be shocked. So this was filed in June of last year on behalf of two young children, an American military veteran, and Marvin, a retired professional football player. By way of brief history, despite the 80 years of stigmatization of cannabis in the United States as a supposed gateway drug used primarily by hippies and minorities, there's a long and rich history spanning thousands of years of people from virtually every part of the world using cannabis for medical, industrial, spiritual, and recreational purposes. A number of names you may recognize are George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Monroe, Abraham Lincoln, JFK himself, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and the one and only Barack Obama. An assortment of the most intelligent and accomplished American statesmen, if not global statesmen. The criminalization of cannabis, a drug that has never killed one human being, arose out of the enactment of legislation underwritten by illegal racial and ethnic animus, and was implemented and enforced at the federal level by those who chose to disregard scientific properties and benefits, and who were motivated by hatred and bigotry. The plaintiffs were seeking a declaration, not only because under the 10th Amendment, the doctor and patient relationship is constitutionally between the states, and there should be no federal involvement at all, but also because it violated the Due Process Clause and the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. Now the plaintiffs, an extraordinary group of people. Let's focus on other than Marvin right now, because he will tell his story. The first, Alexis, a beautiful young girl from Texas. At the age of 7, Alexis began experiencing seizures and was eventually diagnosed with a condition known as intractable epilepsy, a seizure disorder so extreme that a patient's seizures cannot be safely controlled with any FDA-approved drugs. By reason of this intractable epilepsy, Alexis often suffered from multiple seizures per day and spent most of her school day in the nurse's office. After 2 years of doctor's visits, urgent trips to the emergency rooms, her family exhausted traditional pharmaceutical options to stop what Alexis, this beautiful 11-year-old girl, called her seizure monster. And guess what? The tinctures of THC and CBD worked, but because she lived in Texas, she would have been arrested with her parents for taking the medicine. Plaintiff number 2, Jose Balin, an American war hero, served in Iraq and witnessed things so horrific, things that no human being should have to see, that he suffered PTSD like so many of our veterans and could nearly not function. No drug helped him. The only thing that helped was cannabis. And because he lived in a state where it was illegal, he could not be helped. Plaintiff number 3, Jager Cote. If you're a parent, this is going to touch you at your core. A 6-year-old boy today. He suffers from a rare congenital form, something called Lay's disease, which should have killed him at the age of 4. At the age of 1, he was in hospice, like a terminal cancer victim, and screamed out in pain daily. No medication helped him. The only thing that prevented his suffering was a tincture of THC and cannabis. And but for moving to Colorado, his mother and father would have been put in prison. Marvin, tell us, how did you get associated with these people?
Well, I was approached by the law firm Hiller, PC and Company probably a year before the lawsuit was filed. And so when they approached me, I was kind of skeptical about it because I know that High Times and Normal had these lawsuits against the federal government, and they went nowhere, and the government would delay, deny, and then they would die out, and they would go on in the courts for a couple of decades. But then once I got my hand on that brief and saw how well it was written, and it was like a history of cannabis and hemp throughout this country, that kind of piqued my interest. And then once I got to the late 60s, early 70s to see why cannabis was put on the Controlled Substance Act by Richard Nixon, who had a report, the Schaefer report, that said everything we know about cannabis today, that it has medicinal benefits, it's not a gateway drug, it's not addictive, it's not going to, it doesn't raise crime and all this stuff. But Richard Nixon put all that aside because he wanted to go after two groups of people. He wanted to go after the counterculture people of the 60s who were protesting the Vietnam War, and then he wanted to go after African American. And he put it on the Controlled Substance Act, and so you went from 1972, where about 30,000 African American men were in prison, to 1973, when cannabis was on the Controlled Substance Act. It almost went up tenfold. So we had 300,000. So that really started in earnest the war on drugs. And being an African American and growing up in the inner city, I see what that has done to the families and the structures of our communities. So I was kind of pissed off about that. And so that's why excuse my language, that's why I joined the suit. That's why I recruited Jose. That's why I got Alexis, because she's from Texas. I'm from Texas. She's a Texas refugee living up in Colorado. And we wanted to present a strong case to the government, and not saying legalize it, but saying that it was illegal the way it was put on the Controlled Substance Act, and it's unconstitutional. And so we've gone from there. We were in district court, and the case got dismissed. But I wasn't worried about that because I knew we end up in, whether we won it in district court or where we lost, we're going to be in appellate court anyway. So that's where we are now. And then when you look at the reason why cannabis is there, half of it, or more than half of it, has to do with the negative, racial connotations. And then at the time, the AG was Jeff Sessions, but you look at his full name, Jefferson, named after Jefferson Davis. Beauregard, named after the general who bombed and started the Civil War, Fort Sumter. So he's seeing cannabis, or he would call it marijuana, through the lens of the lie that we've been told about this plant for the past 80 years. And so it was kind of personal, and just because Jeff Sessions is gone, this thing is still carrying on, because it has to happen, man, because like I said, we've been lied to, and we are on unorganized truth. We're going to get some organized lie, because I can remember in school that it's a gateway drug and reefer madness and these government endorsed programs telling a lie about this plant. We need to come together and let the whole nation know that it's a lie. Medicinal marijuana, I believe, needs to be in every medicine cabinet in the country, and recreational or adult use, I'm fine with it. Leave it to the people, because we have other societal ills like organized sports gambling, alcohol, tobacco that are in our society. So let's bring in something that's going to heal this nation. As Bob Marley said, it can heal the nation. But I'm fighting for, not me, because I don't smoke, I'm a CBD guy, but I know that we need to get this thing off the Controlled Substance Act. We need to decriminalize it, and then we need to make whole the communities that were affected the most by prohibition of this plant. Because even if you're a Caucasian in this country, cannabis probably is legal. African Americans and the minorities, we're still getting arrested 8 to 10 times higher behind this plant that's doing no harm. So we're still fighting the fight, and I'm there for it, and I feel that when they look back at the history of cannabis, maybe I'll have a small part of that, of where it's going to be in 30 and 40 years from now.
Thank you. So here's some fascinating anecdotes. World War II, the U.S. military coined a term to give sailors at sea for many, many months some time away to relax. And it was 2 words that was taken by Madison Avenue in the 1970s to sell us Americans discounted intoxication. And those 2 words were the words happy hour. Think about it. The US government created those 2 words. Last year, $74 billion of alcohol was sold. $2 billion was used to convince people like you and I through sex and aspirational marketing and sports marketing to consume something that has 0 benefit to our bodies, that kills thousands of people every year. It's extraordinary. Imagine if the cannabis industry had a Madison Avenue moment, and instead of the word stoned or buzzed or high, they came up with a new terminology, a terminology of health and wellness and medication. Marvin, give me your comments on that.
I think it's going to happen, because I always tell people, it's like when Colorado and the state of Washington went off, I think that was 2012. That was only 7 years ago. So that's like the Wright brothers taking off at Kitty Hawk, you know? So we're in the very, very infant stages of this deal. We're not even in the jet age. We're not even in the twin propeller ages. We're still pushing the plane down the runway. So this thing is gonna, you know, look way different in 10 and 20 years or 30 years from now than it does now. But I do believe that this is the way we're gonna medicate for the rest of, you know, the 21st century and beyond, because we've medicated with this plant for 10,000 years until, you know, the 1930s, and we know the reasons why it was put illegal, but it's gonna surpass alcohol, you know, because whenever you're talking about alcohol, and I'm a criminal justice major, and I know about it, I went right along with cops and whatever, ask a policeman about the domestic violence calls, and ask them how many alcohol is involved in domestic violence calls. Probably 95 to 100% of them. But ask them about cannabis, and tell you no. He'll tell you no, but they're still arresting people. You know, I was coming down on the plane reading about a 71-year-old grandmother that had a broad spectrum CBD, and she spent 2 days in jail in Texas, and she was barely above 10% of THC. We have to get away from that. We have to get away from this. See it, normalize it, see it as medicine, and we're going to get our Madison Avenue slogan. And one of the things that you'll never hear me call cannabis is marijuana, because the etymology of that is racist. They wanted something
That's absolutely right. For many of you who don't know, here's an extraordinary anecdote. Between 1860 and 1937, the #1 doctor-prescribed medication was opium or an opium-based drug. #2 was something called cannabis. And cannabis was even recommended by physicians to children with whooping cough. The term cannabis went away, and the word marijuana came to being because marijuana was a term used by Mexicans after the Mexican War in the South when they brought that there. And our government converted a scientific and botanical term to what became a racist word to stigmatize people of color Jews, African Americans, and anybody they didn't like. So it is absolutely correct. But let's go a different tact, okay? We are right now, 33 states in America are legal. Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S., Virgin Islands. By the end of this year, probably another 6 to 7 states will fall. The genie, guys, is out of the bottle. This is not a question of if, it is a question of when. There are now 28 bills before the House of Representatives, and one is likely to pass called the States Act, which will put as full-time legislation basically what was the Rohrabacher-Farr bill, which said you cannot use money out of the federal budget to attack citizens in a state that are doing something legal in the state where they live. That should pass. The bigger issue is the federal level. It will start, as it does in every state, with decriminalization. Then it will move into medical, and then it will move into adult use. Now you note the term I use, adult use, and I hope it's a term that you all use going forward. The term recreational is bad. The term recreational was created by the New York Times. It is a media-created word. You do not say you drink recreational, okay? Think about it. Every legislation in all 11 states that have an adult use bill says the Adult Use and Compassionate Act. It is about responsibility. It is about people over 21 or older. It is not recreational. With respect to the federal government, whatever we feel about our existing president today, we do know that he is one of the shrewdest politicians to sit in that seat. Every Democrat who is running for office has a pro-cannabis position. Even Mr. Biden moved in that direction in the last week. My thought is, and I wrote about it on April Fool's, and it's funny because half the world thought it was true, was Trump legalizes. And I wrote an article based upon what everybody would want if it was. 8 days later, The Hill, one of the top blogs in America, basically plagiarized me, but that's okay. It's a fantastic form of flattery, and basically said, should Trump take the vote away from the Democrats? I believe that he will, because if he does, he will get a part of the people of color vote, the mothers with sick children vote, the children with sick parent vote. Marvin, what are your thoughts on that?
I've always said that. Ever since he came into office, that would be something that he would do to ensure that he has a second term. This would be something that he can say that the past presidents didn't do and had an opportunity to do, particularly with his predecessor. I know that there are people that are lobbying that know him personally, that go down to Mar-a-Lago and talk about it with him. I believe it's going to come. I would never go to the White House because I get roasted by my community. But it would be wonderful if he did it, because when the prohibition of alcohol ended in 1933, it took until 1951 for all states to get on board, and that's what we're seeing with cannabis. And the rules and regulation of cannabis change from not state to state, but from municipality to municipality. And we need some federal guidance. And then once we get the federal guidance, we're going to become an industry, just like the tobacco industry, just like the trucking industry, or any other industry. But right now, we're just an economy we're just a movement with an economy behind us. But I think it would be wonderful if he did it. I wouldn't say he would get my vote, but he would get a lot of votes if he did do it. And he wouldn't get my votes because of some of the social issues, what have you. But if he did it, he's a very shrewd politician. I can see him signing an executive order, legalizing cannabis and then taking it to the Hill to get the regulations and rules for it.
That would be an extraordinary thing. We'll see what happens over the next couple years, but I'm betting on it, guys. I think he takes it away from the Democrats, and that issue goes away, and the election in 2 years becomes even closer as a result. Imagine cannabis moving the election needle. Who could have ever imagined that?
Well, I did, and I hope it does happen. I did.
You heard it here.
But
you heard it here.
I was hoping Barack would throw a big finger and do it on his last day in office and sign an executive order, but that didn't happen. But President Obama. But Trump can definitely do it. And then, I know this may not sound very popular in this space, but I welcome big pharma, I welcome big tobacco and all that because they can't reinvent the wheel. And we're going to get the billions of dollars of research and development that they're going to bring to this plant. So everybody knows about THC and CBD, but what about the other cannabinoids? I believe that these other cannabinoids that are unexplored, they're going to do things to this country that opiates or benzodiazepines could never do. And like I said, this is the way we're going to medicate in the 21st century. So this thing is happening, and particularly when they do come in here and the tide goes out, we'll see who's naked and who has a good company, or who's just making a stock play, or whose CBD is doing what they're supposed to do, said it's supposed to do, and all these different strains. We'll see.
We will see. And for those of you that don't have a strong science background and have not attended a lot of science conferences, they're all living mammals have an endocannabinoid system, which was discovered in the 60s by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in Israel. The endocannabinoid system creates homeostasis in the human body. And as Dr. Mechoulam told me in Tel Aviv, Michael, whether you believe in God or Mother Nature, there is nothing in our body that was put there unless we need it. The fact that we have a response to the cannabinoids, which, by the way, 144 have been discovered to date, most of them in the Technion in Israel. Only 2, THC and CBD. There's 142 other cannabinoids. There is the belief by most scientists and researchers that those cannabinoids, or the combinations of those cannabinoids, can and will replace all opiates, and can and will replace all central nervous system drugs, including Prozac. The number 2 reasons that cannabis is prescribed is for anxiety and for chronic pain. Those 2 things affect 65% of all Americans and over 50% of the world's population. Imagine that. Marvin.
No, I can see it. It's going to happen because people, if you do some forward thinking and think 20 or 40 years from now and where we're going to be, they're going to think we're in the dark ages. They're going to look back and be ashamed of our lack of knowledge about this plant, and it's been here for 10,000 years, and we made it illegal and we demonized it. This thing is going to happen, and I'm happy to do my part, but I know this, that the dynamic athlete that's going to bring cannabis to middle America and make it acceptable all over the country and all over the world, he's probably in junior high right now. Like I said, we're still early, so I might be pushing up daisies and what have you, but this thing is gonna happen. But we have to keep doing things right because we're placeholders for the generations that's gonna come after us and really take this thing to the next level and discover all the other 142 cannabinoids. And like I said, they're going to look back at us and say, what were they doing? But they're going to know that a few people, small people, knew what was happening and is trying to help it and have moved this thing along to where they can take it and take it to the next level.
Thank you. So Marvin, as we wrap up, what are you doing today in the cannabis world? I know you have a number of business interests. You are an educator and an advocate. Give us an overview of what your day is like now with respect to healing. Talk a little bit about Athletes for Care, an extraordinary nonprofit organization. I think we're up to over 100 ex-professional athletes, NBA, NHL. Major League Baseball, who are now coming out and speaking about the damage that opiates did to them during their playing days and the benefits of medical cannabis use?
Day to day, just trying to get my day organized. I got on the plane at 7, but I forgot my socks.
I thought that was a style.
I got on the plane, yeah. So I changed on the plane in the bathroom. When I got in the bathroom, I kept looking for my socks. I didn't have my socks. But day to day, it all depends on the day. You know, I try to help out. Like I said, one of the big things is they're trying to, and my attorney, Michael Hiller, they're writing the rules and regulations for New York State. So I'm trying to make sure that there's a social equity component in there to make sure that the communities that have been disenfranchised and hurt the most, that they have a level playing field with cannabis. As Al Sharpton says, we don't want the white people going to the bank and we keep going to jail. So I want to do that. I want to normalize it in athletics. Make sure that cannabis is an alternative to the opiates and benzodiazepine that the team doctors and team trainers are killing these guys with. As a businessman, I want to continue to do good business practices and expand the reach of cannabis not only in America, but South and Central America, the EU, Africa, up in Canada. We wanted this thing to keep growing, and the whole thing is like, I'm not afraid to tell people that I'm in the cannabis space, because when I go home to Texas, people don't know that CBD doesn't get you high. They won't even take my products, because we come to these conferences and we're preaching to the choir, because only 10% of the country knows anything past THC. So you have to, stick to the science and tell people about this plant and the medicinal benefits of it. Because everybody thinks people just want to get high and smoke and get high. Well, they're smoking because they want to feel better. And it has all these medicinal benefits. It's helping out veterans. It's helping out senior citizens. My mother's 85 years old, and she takes cannabinoids every day. It's helping out athletes. It's helping out, people that are dealing with the daily anxiety and stresses of life. And, when you look at it, you get all these anecdotal reports. When cannabis goes into community, alcohol consumption goes down, and that's a good thing. So I'm just trying to push this thing forward. I think we're all swimming the same way right now. The race really hasn't started. We're all running the same way because the race hasn't started. So let's do good business practice. Let's help each other out, because we're all a collective, and keep pushing this thing forward.
Thank you so much. Great. So in conclusion, we're going to have a moment here, and people who know me know that I'm not too afraid to speak my mind, and I don't mind a hater every once in a while. If you can believe, after my Trump article, I got my first death threat. It was kind of cool. Everybody should have a death threat. Some crazy guy in Covina who thought I was attacking our president. I wanted to take a film crew and knock on his door, but the FBI suggested that wasn't a good idea. But I've been thinking for a long time that the industry needs an anthem, something that people hear and are moved by. Do you remember We Are the World? Remember how you were inspired? I had the good fortune to work with Quincy 20 years after to raise money for the victims of Darfur on We Are the Future. And I've been thinking, what if we had a song? What if we had an anthem? And if that anthem was played and every single dollar went to the nonprofits like Tracy Ryan Saving Sophie, or Marvin's, or Alexis in Texas, or Jager, who's a day away from his life going away. What if that happened? So I talked to a couple of my music buddies, a couple folks out there. Can you help me write something? Can you help me? And yeah, of course, they all said they'll help me. End of the day, they said, you get the song done, we'll perform in it. So one crazy night, 4 a.m., I had an idea, and I wrote it down, and some people thought it was a good idea. So we're going to talk the words today. And we think this thing is going to have some momentum. We're going to record it with some extraordinary people. We're going to put it on iTunes. Every dollar raised is going to help anybody who needs help, whether it's veterans or children or the elderly. So Marvin's going to help me today. Marvin is going to be my Snoop. So we're going to give this a shot. You promised. He said he had courage. All right? So here we go. And it should not surprise you. Here we go. The song is called Dear Jeff Sessions. My first hate mail is going to be from his wife. I hear it coming now. So here we go. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, Monroe, Alabama, like Harper Lee, named for a general who bombed Fort Sumter, President of the Confederacy. Selma's holy sail, laying beneath your young boy's feet, father's words of hate and anger are what you took to sleep. Boy Scouts taught values in your community. You became an Eagle and learned seriously. Studying law in Tuscaloosa, college in Montgomery, made your apple fall not far from the family tree.
Dear Jeff Sessions, help me understand. You teach the words of Jesus throughout our beloved land. To help those who suffer, a plea from Sanjay G. God created nature, nature created weed. Dear Jeff Sessions, will you help me please? Mama's got glaucoma, daddy's riddled with disease. I may not make them better, I can take away their pain. Blind to color, race, religion, please help them today.
Jefferson Beauregard Session, you served in the Army. Rising to rank of captain helped shape your philosophy. Respect, work, faith, and country were virtues at your core. So long as white and hetero were the faces behind your door. From law and private practice to district attorney, Obama's 44th Attorney General, were they all blind to see? KKK okay? Whites for civil rights a disgrace? Judgeship denied led to your moral lesson. Blacks and Jews are of the human race.
Dear Jeff Sessions, please help me understand. You teach the words of Jesus throughout our beloved land. To help all those who suffer, a plea from Sanjay G. God created nature, nature created weed. Dear Jeff Sessions, will you help me please? Daddy's body is a wasting, baby girl has epilepsy. I may not make them better, I can take their pain away. Blind to color, race, religion, please help them today.
State AG to U.S. Senate, a place from which to lead. Opiates now killing thousands. You choose a war against a weed? Against the rights of women, those of color, immigrants, and gay. Are these the kinds of actions that your Jesus would portray? As a father and grandfather, what goes through your mind when they lay ill? Are you not like us mere mortals? Our tragic memories linger still. A man of virtue, a family of Christianity. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, open your eyes to see.
Dear Jeff Sessions, won't you help me please? Parents no longer with me, ashes floated out to sea. I could not make them better, I took their pain away. Blind to color, race, religion, you must help us today.
Our prayers were finally answered. 21 months was way too long. Your Jesus could not save you, your vision all too wrong. Your pride, your dreams, your virtue, take them back to Alabama. May the nation get a counselor with compassion for all man. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, your help, thank God we no longer need. Suffering children and the aged, hear whispers of unanswered pleas. 2 more states fell this November, 33. You're on the wrong side of history. And like the father and grandfather before you, that will be your final legacy. Thank you very much. Marvin, Washington.
Hey, thank you.